Welcome to the Metamorphosis podcast, where we explore the possibilities and processes of personal and community transformation based on the ancient wisdom of Kemet, one of many classical African civilizations, as a foundation. I am Dr. Catherine Lynn Adams, an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Krst University, where I teach courses on oral and literary traditions of the African world, with an emphasis on interviewing and archiving the stories of our elders. I am serving as a scribe for this project. Joining me is Baba Derrick Jackson. Baba Derrick is the priest and thought leader of Krst Universal Temple, a spiritual community in South Carolina. I want to ask you about the name Krst Universal Temple.
My laugh is more from irony, the irony of the situation of how we got that name. I didn't name it Krst Universal Temple. The people who started it named it Krst Universal Temple, and they wanted something to identify not just themselves, but who we are as a people. And they remembered me talking about that name Christ, that it's a title and wasn't Jesus' last name. He should have been known as Jesus the Christ, but they dropped the and made it Jesus' last name. And that the first person in history that we know about, and I emphasize that we know about, who had that title that we can document, was Imhotep. Okay, and so and it's a title that's given to people based on the life they had led. And so they said, in their thinking, if we kept it, the title, maybe those who started out in Christianity would be curious enough to figure out, why did we spell Christ with a K? And why did we drop the vowel? And that gives us an opportunity to teach. And so that was the thinking of the people who created it.
Can you say more about that being a title and the connection to Imhotep?
Well, eventually when I came on, we were thinking, well, to tie it to Imhotep was to say, here was a man in the history of African people who was about excellence, who was about understanding purpose, understanding, and see, coming out of our rites of passage of identity, purpose, and direction. Those were the three things we used to say in Project Sankofa. So here was a man who knew who he was through identity. He understood his purpose, and then he understood what direction he wanted to go in. And so we wanted to keep that theme of identity, purpose, and direction through the connection of Christ, being, we know who we are, we know what our purpose is, and we know what direction we wanted to go in. Using Sankofa symbolically to say we go back and fetch it, but we also use the Shabaka text where Tahaka says, not only go back and fetch it, but make it better than before. So that was the theme behind using the connection between Imhotep, Tahaka, and what we wanted to do. Not Tahaka, but Shabaka, the Shabaka text.
What's the translation of that title, Christ in English?
Well, let me put it this way. The way that it's been used is the anointed. But anointed doesn't mean it was one person. It just means a person who's followed a particular path and reached his fullest or her fullest potential and carrying out their purpose. Sort of like, and let me put it in this terms of Queen Hatshepsut. When Queen Hatshepsut says, not only does she say, I am the daughter of God, but she says, I want to be an effective image as the daughter of God. So, as the priest, I keyed on that effective image part, saying it's not just me to have the knowledge, but to do something that shows everybody my divine spirit in what I do. That my art is based in what I do, not just what I say. So in English, translated to the anointed, but it doesn't mean what it means in Christianity. That anyone could have had that title.
I'm thinking about how that shows up in people who are named Christian or maybe even Kristen, that the root of those names are connected to their title.
And by accident rather than by intention, which says something, should say something to us about DNA and how DNA can cause us memories of things. We may not understand where it came from or how it came about, but yet it's trying constantly to surface itself. So we hear it in Kristen, Chris, especially Chris spelt with a K, which is unusual. But you see somebody purposely put a K in there, and they'll say they were trying to be different. But I say they were having an ancestral moment.
Has there been any blowback of what you're aware of from Christian communities for the similarity or the use of that title? Can you say something about that?
Let me make a distinction between the congregation of these Christian churches from the leadership. Whenever I explain it to the congregation, they want more. But when the leadership is in earshot of me explaining it, they don't invite me back.
Say that again.
Whenever I'm speaking before a Christian, Western Christian church congregation, the congregation comes and says, when you going to come back and tell us and teach us some more? Because they became fascinated by this idea of telling an origin story, right? And then telling the origin story of Imhotep and these different characters, right? But the leadership don't invite me back, because you can't just show up in somebody's house, right? So you have to be invited back. Of course, they would claim they're going to invite me back, but it never happened.
What were you taught about that title Christ when you were training in the priesthood?
They, of course, they used the term anointed, but they used it in the sense of as if Jesus was the only anointed person in the world. And when you personalize it and says, I've been anointed, you've been anointed by Jesus, not because your gift, your talent, and your skills have pushed you to optimize to your full potential, and you've displayed it not just in what you say, but how you walk and talk, right? No, it's because Jesus was in you, and Jesus took your sins away that allows you to now say that word, anointed. And I was like, that's not how I understood that word once I learned the African side of it. So I already knew the African side when I was going through priesthood training. And so because I was going through the training and I knew I had to swallow some stuff that I didn't want to swallow to get through the classes, I just didn't say anything until I got what they call your ordination papers, right? Then afterwards, I was like, no, no one person.
It seems to me that at least one of the things that I understand about traditional African culture is that there is this repetition of creation, this repetition of optimization, that the things that are possible that in some practices may be limited to one person is actually available, accessible to everyone. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. See what my theory of what happens when people, especially Kemet, when people study Kemet, they get stuck in errors. Okay. They get stuck maybe in the first three dynasties, or they get stuck by the first intermediary period, or they get stuck by the 11th. You see where I'm going? By the 11th dynasty. They get stuck in periods and not see the totality of the flow of information, even before the Pharaonic age, and see that these evolutionary periods produce what Dr. Asa Hilliard called golden ages. And these golden ages were the times that they came back and improve upon things that they started out with. For instance, in the first three dynasties, everything was about the king. All stuff came from the divine through the king. Then you have this intermediary period where the priests, because the priests were in the gnomes teaching that everybody has this divinity, right? Which created a big conflict between the so-called nobles and aristocracy of that period with the commoners because of the priest teaching. So through the 11th, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th dynasty, you have these what Europeans have called the intermediary period. I call it the chaotic potential period. See, chaos, as is used by Kemet, is where all potential is. And from that chaos rises out order, okay? But they look at it as potential. So what happens in the 10th and 11th dynasty is that potential changes from just the royal house having it to everybody having it. So now you have Ptah teaching you that everybody has this divinity. And because now you have this divinity, you are expected. There's certain expectations that come with that. So in the teaching of Ptah, it is, I believe he's teaching his nephew, if I got that right, the things he needs to know if he's going to walk in the way of Ma'at. And so that's how I see Kemet. And then there were setbacks, like when the Hyksos showed up. But even after the Hyksos shows up, there is again that restoration project of restoring the things, and they taking it to another height. Because now you see Queen Hatshepsut come through. You notice I'm not using the title. Most people think Pharaoh was their name, and Pharaoh is a title. Okay, so she was holding a seat like president. You know, president doesn't matter whether it's a female or a male. Pharaoh doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female. It's a title for the seat that you sit in. So as Queen Hatshepsut took over, she takes it to a whole nother level by informing us that she is the daughter of God. And then in her statement, she says, I want to be an effective image as the daughter of God. And she built an entire temple that's still standing today. So if you don't watch the flow, and then there's another intermediary period that comes after after Ramesses. And then you have the Shabaka text being discovered and recovered. And we find in the Shabaka text that Taharqa says, I want to restore Kemet, but I want to make it better than before. So even before we knew the understanding of the word Sankofa, written in document form in our sacred text, is the idea of go back and fetch it. But what people will drop is the second part of what he said, make it better than before. And then he used the word inheritance, which was key to me, to understanding you get this information passed down through generation as a traditional inheritance. So then you have the sacred responsibility to not just take it on, but to continue it through the next, as we like to say at the temple, the next 7 generations.
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you.
We want to archive something special that was established in 2000, more than 2 decades ago. In upcoming episodes, we will be exploring the history of Krst Universal Temple, its teachings on spirituality and personal growth, and its role in the Columbia, South Carolina community. We invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to receive notifications for future episodes. Thank you for listening.